Welcome to the Healthy Relationships Initiative podcast. Our goal is to provide information and tools to help you build happier, healthier, and safer relationships of all kinds. To learn more about HRI, please visit www.guilfordhri.org and check us out on social media at GuilfordHRI.
Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Healthy Relationships Initiative Relationship Booster. The Healthy Relationships Initiative is a partnership between UNC Greensboro and the Phillips Foundation, and our mission is to promote happy, healthy, and safe relationships of all kinds in our community and beyond. To learn more about the Healthy Relationships Initiative, please visit guilfordhri.org or also connect with us on social media at guilfordhri. Just a few little housekeeping details to cover before we get started. First of all, we do have a chat room today, and you won't be able to see your other people's names listed, but if you do want to use an anonymous username for today's chat, that's certainly fine as a way to add a little bit of extra confidentiality for any questions that you may submit. We do invite you and really encourage you to submit questions throughout today's program. We're here today talking live, and so we'll be able to take some of those questions. We unfortunately aren't usually able to get to all of the questions that are submitted, but we do try to get to as many as we can in the hour that we have. So make sure if you're interested in submitting a question that you send it to our moderator, Camila Dos Santos, and send the question to her, and then she'll be able to share that throughout the program. And just before the program ends today, please be sure that you provide feedback on our survey feedback form, and the link to that will be provided in the chat room later in the program. Our topic for today's Relationship Booster is teamwork and parenting, and our featured expert today is Dr. Julie Mendez. My name is Christine Murray, and I'm a professor at the Department of Counseling at UNC Greensboro, and I'm also the director of the Healthy Relationships Initiative. Our expert today is Dr. Julie Mendez. She is a professor here at UNC Greensboro in the Department of Psychology, and she is also the Chancellor's Fellow for Campus Climate at UNC Greensboro. So thanks so much for being here with us today, Julie. So if you could share a little bit more about your background and what brought you to being interested in this topic of teamwork and parenting.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's going to be a great chat that we can have about parenting. I've been interested in parenting and young children and their development since I first entered into graduate school. So I have a degree as a clinical psychologist. As you mentioned, I'm also a professor here at UNC Greensboro. And one of the things that I do on this campus is research and teaching about child development of all different ages and how parenting provides a supportive context to help children really thrive and meet their potential in lots of different ways. So whether it's in sort of community settings, doing parent workshops, or writing articles, or working with Healthy Relationships Initiative, I'm just really interested and passionate about creating space for parents or people who support parents or people who might become parents in the future, just helping think about the preparation and the big job that it is to be someone's parent, and to also think about connecting with others that can support you in achieving your goals as a family.
Yeah, well, I know you've got a lot of great expertise and a lot of professional experience in this, and of course you're a parent yourself too.
That's right.
So I'm sure that informs your thoughts on this topic, but I know you're going to have a lot of great wisdom to share throughout today's program based on your past clinical experience, your work in the community, your research, and also, again, probably some of your personal experiences too. So we'll go ahead and just jump right into our topic for the day, which is teamwork and parenting. And in fact, some of you may not know this, but actually Julie works with our HRI e-learning center team, and one of our full-length programs in the e-learning center is on this very topic of teamwork and parenting. So for those who, after today's discussion, are interested in learning more about that topic, you can check out the e-learning center, which you can access through our main website, to learn more about this topic. So one of the reasons why we were so interested in this topic is we kept hearing about it in the community as we were planning the Healthy Relationships Initiative, and just how important this concept of teamwork is in parenting, and especially we heard about it in some of the specific populations that we heard about that we'll talk about later today, such as co-parenting after divorce, grandparents raising grandchildren or who are really involved. So before we dive into some of those really specific topics, let's start more broadly and just hear some of your thoughts of what does it mean to think about a team around parenting? Who might be involved in that team and what does it look like?
Right. So I came up with this idea. It's not unique to me, but if you think about parenting, you might think about a child and you might think about the people that are primary in raising that child. You know, you think about these images of sort of leaving the hospital and kind of who's around. But one of the things we know about isolation is that it creates stress around the child if they're only relying on a limited number of adults that can support them. And the other thing that is really important to know about the research is that when parents are feeling stress, even if they're not intending to pass that along to their child, children are just really smart and sociable creatures and they absorb what's going on around them. And so we really need to think about this idea of a team, and I know we'll keep talking and unpacking this image, but when you think about a team, not everyone is created equal on that team. Everybody has their different roles. You kind of need different people on the team depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And so there's lots of people that we would consider being on, you know, team parent. It might be your direct family members. It could be your friends, current and past friends, and people you don't even know yet that will come into your life. It can be all the medical, education, and professionals in the community that are there with sort of skills to help you grow in your challenges. And then in situations of crisis or maybe more immediate needs, we have people that can provide that support to us. So safety needs, different housing, transportation, food insecurity, like things that may happen to people, loss of employment. There are all kinds of other resources and professionals that support parents in getting places that they need to go.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I think is so interesting about this topic, that while when we first started hearing about it, we were hearing about it in the context of some really specific types of parenting situations. Again, co-parenting after divorce, or the grandparents raising grandchildren.
That's right.
But when we stepped back to really start thinking more about it, we realized that actually this concept of teamwork in parenting is something that applies to really any parent or any caregiver in any situation, because every single parent is going to have some group of people that's surrounding them. And I guess if there's a lack of that support or a lack of that teamwork, then that becomes a different sort of issue too, as they're struggling maybe with some isolation.
That's right. So you can think about teamwork in a couple of different ways, and as you've mentioned, there are larger modules to help you kind of do an assessment or a test of sort of who are the people on your team. Because you have to know kind of who's on your team, who can you go to when you have a need, but then also how the people on your team work together. And that's what we hear about a lot too, that when conflict can come up, either between parents or between families and schools, for example, how do you navigate that? And how do you know that your team is really working effectively? And, you know, sometimes you have to develop some skills and perspective taking to kind of think about ways to navigate that. So I hope we'll be able to talk about that today. Mm-hmm. I wanted to add one other thing, because I think this is changing, and I don't know if it's, you know, changes just means it's different. So maybe you are used to the way things are in certain communities, but we now know that more people are entering the workforce. We know that more people have multiple jobs. We also know parents are working non-standard hours outside of the kind of Monday to Friday time period. We know children are spending time in childcare, after school. There's so many opportunities extracurricular, and so it's complicated. Like, who's on your team at different points in your life is really kind of complicated to navigate sometimes, and that's what makes it different now, and we also have this technology piece that we can take advantage of to connect, but also provides some challenges too.
Yeah, so that's a great point too, because who's on the team sounds like it's really probably something that's constantly changing. And so to some extent, it becomes managing that team becomes a part of the parenting process that really changes over time as new people are coming into that team and some people are maybe leaving. And sometimes that can be a really leaving, I mean, on a bad term, but like you're saying, it could just be a child is in a child care preschool program and then they go to kindergarten. So we've got a different set of teachers to kind of move in and out of that system. And of course, every teamwork, the other point that you made a few minutes ago that I really liked was that on a team, everybody plays a different role. And so this idea that on the team, everybody's not doing exactly the same thing, and that wouldn't really be an effective team anyway.
That's right. And I think one other idea, I spend a lot of time around teams, sports teams. I have people in my life who like sports. I like to watch baseball. So I think a baseball team is a nice metaphor for this. So on a baseball team, you need 9 people to come up to bat. Not everybody's going to hit a home run every single time. And when you're out in the field, not everybody can play the same position. So some people are going to be better at pitching and catching, and other people are going to be better at running and hitting. And when it kind of works all together, you get this really sort of amazing group of people, all hopefully dedicated to a common goal. So that would probably be the third thing that I would look for, is that are people really dedicated to the success and well-being of your child? And those are the people that you want to recruit in to be on your team.
And it's interesting, not to kind of drag this metaphor out too far, but I guess to some extent the primary parent or the primary caregiver or caregivers for that child are sort of like the coach and deciding who to bring into the team, or maybe a team manager. I know you like baseball, but you know, kind of who to involve, kind of calling the shots and running the show and managing some of those dynamics too. So in a way, a parent is part of that team, but in a way they're also kind of managing or coaching that team too.
That's right. And we always want to think about the parents as being the primary people involved in the decision making and planning for what children need. However, there's a really important lesson to be learned about you can benefit from other people's experiences and sort of try on those different skills or try on those different resources and say, well, that resource might really be helpful to me. And so it's sort of this idea that you don't know what you need until you need it. And the more planful you can be about that, it may help you navigate the whole period of time, not just from the birth of your child, but all the way up until you're hopefully dealing with an adult child and have a really healthy relationship with that person that you've raised and invested a lot of time into, and really enjoy that outcome.
And so I'm glad you also mentioned how times have changed and parenting has changed, even from a generation ago to today. It looks really different, and all of those factors that you mentioned. So why in today's world especially do you think that it's helpful for parents to really adopt this teamwork mentality for parenting?
Yeah, I think the first thing to really think about is that children's needs are not all the same. And the advantage of more information about parenting is that there are more examples. So I think parents can look and see, well, this seems to fit my child's needs, or this seems to look like the type of family that I'm experiencing, whereas that might be different than your neighbor or your best friend's family or even your own family of origin. So that's one kind of big difference, is that there's a lot of information to choose from, and so you have to be maybe a better consumer of the ideas that you choose to follow. So we're always recommending things that are evidence-based, that have been studied in the research literature, but we're also recommending that parents use their own instincts to say, this doesn't seem like this would be a good choice for me, and to really start to create dialogue between other professionals. Maybe you have a counselor, maybe you have a teacher, and you can really start to develop a relationship with people and say, well, why are you recommending this for my child? You can bring your concerns to your child's pediatrician and try to have a discussion. Now, everyone's busy, and in today's world, that's the biggest thing that we hear. I don't have time to talk to people. I don't have time to find out good information. I don't have time to go to programs. So you make it work. You try to find things online. You try to talk to people while you're waiting in line someplace. You know, reading resources can be helpful, and ultimately getting kind of good referrals from people that you trust. That can be important too.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's important to be intentional about making time to bring in those different perspectives, but then also kind of filtering out information that you're getting from different team members. So just because someone's part of the team doesn't mean that you automatically have to do exactly what they say, because really as a parent, ideally you are the one who knows your child's needs best. So it's kind of advocating for your child at the same time as keeping somewhat of an open mind to understand these different perspectives, because I would think as a parent, we have opinions about our kids and what they need, but then we're not seeing them in the school system. So that's why as we think about teachers, they're a part of the team, and they may be seeing some things in the school environment that we don't see at home. And so it's really kind of making space for those different perspectives from people who are involved in the child's life, but then also not letting yourself maybe get buried in other people's perspectives and opinions.
That's right. And I think there's a difference between someone who wants to give you an advice and sort of an idea and then walk away, and someone who's really committed to your success and your family's success. So you can tell the difference with teachers, with other professionals, even people in your own family who are willing to say, you know, what do you need from us to be part of this team? Can we offer you a ride? Can we cook a meal for you? Do you need someone as a shoulder to cry on? Or are you doing really well and do you need us to just celebrate your success? And so what are you looking for out of your team? The better that you're able to communicate what you want from someone else, the more likely they'll be able to deliver it. I think one final thing about this, and we'll probably get into this when we talk about conflict, in any relationship, it's very unlikely that it will be completely equal. So someone is always probably giving more than maybe they're getting, but if the goal is the child's development and success, then everybody wins, because if you've all poured into that child, you can all share in the moments of success. And so it's really not about breaking down who did what for whom. It's really about these transactions over time, and maybe one day you're giving a little, but hopefully another day you're getting a little too. And those are really, really healthy qualities that we see in people who have good teamwork in parenting.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great practical point to really kind of hit home, would be the importance of always keeping that focus on the child's well-being and the child's development and promoting that. And people may have different ideas about that, but if people on a team, even if there's conflict and differences of opinion, if they're remembering that probably everybody shares that same goal, or that hopefully everybody's working toward that same goal, that is a really important practical point for people who are listening today. So why don't we take a question before we move on to the next topic?
Sure. Our first question has to do with building that team, and how do older siblings fit into the team?
Really good question. So in my family, we have older and younger siblings. I think older siblings can be a really great resource. I'll be curious to see what you think too. So depending on the age differences, right, and depending on, we always want to prioritize safety first. So we don't want older siblings to take on too much parental responsibility. However, in situations where an older child is capable of reading or checking over some math problems, maybe doing some chores or housework together, these are things that are both fun and can promote good relationships between the children. They can also promote some arguing, but healthy conflict resolution perhaps. But it might give, the adult in the house a little bit of a break so that they might get something accomplished that they need to do, and the other family is sort of working together. So I'm happy that someone raised that, because I do think that the sibling relationship can be really critical, and even going through something with an older sibling can help the parent reflect on, when your brother was in this situation, or when this happened to your sister, this is what she did, and that can be useful to the younger sibling. Also, taking care and sort of having a younger person feel a sense of responsibility within the family, that can really be healthy for their self-esteem. So it's another great way to have the connection.
Yeah, I think those are great points. The only other thing that I would add too is I think reminding siblings that they're on the same team becomes really important, because
Yeah.
I think there can be a lot of just natural competition, whether it's for attention, for esteem, for time, all those sort of things. And so a lot of times siblings, I think, feel like they're not on the same team. And so I think for parents it's helpful to just really remind them we're all on the same team here. And using some of that language with them, I think, actually can be helpful, because kids often understand the concept of team if they have any experience in sports or with athletics, or even other academic competitions, other sorts of competitions that they might do in school. So I think that's a really powerful reminder, because siblings often do feel oppositional, especially if they're closer in age, but by involving them and, like you're saying, giving them sort of appropriate ways to help each other out and support each other, I think can be really helpful.
That's right. I think too, in any task that you're trying to get done, how can we make a little bit of time for like some fun along the way, or relationship, meaningful time together? So the last idea about that would be the clinical literature tells us this is very important to use praise. So I would be praising the older child for making time and enjoying their younger sibling, and I'd be praising the younger sibling for sharing and being friendly and you know, helping with the cooking in whatever way they can do that. And also to realize that conflict between siblings is very typical, and it's how they work out and develop relationship conflict negotiation skills. So if we don't put them together and we're constantly separating them and saying stop fighting, we need to let them have some time together, even though it might be a little stressful.
Yeah, definitely. I speak from personal experience on that. So, so let's dig a little bit deeper into this idea of teamwork in parenting. And you've already mentioned a few things that, from a real positive perspective of what does it look like navigating conflicts, involving people in different ways, appreciating the different input that people can have. But before we do talk about some of the challenges that can come up with using a teamwork approach to parenting, what does it look like when a parenting team is really working well?
That's a great question. I think people do feel a sense of commitment. So there's a sense that I can rely on you, and maybe not in the immediate moment, but just in a general sense, if I have a need or a question or a favor, that you're someone in my group that I feel comfortable going to. So there's a trust that's built in. I think there's also examples of prior success. And so you have that shared history where you've come through for me in the past, and so now maybe it's my turn to come through for you, or, you know, you've always been there for us and we really appreciate that. You see this a lot in teacher relationships when you have a younger child with a teacher and then that teacher watches the child grow up, and there's a real sense of pride that, you know, I taught you when you were in kindergarten. And the child really feels that sense of investment, and the parent feels really good about that teacher taking ownership and the fact that they contributed to that child, and that child may be graduating high school. One of the things that they do at a local school here is they bring high school students back to the elementary school right before they graduate, and they walk through the halls. And you can see the pride on some of the teachers who had them in their classrooms. So I think there's positive emotion. I think there's a sense of good communication happening. And I think there's a sense of trust that, you know, even though I might be struggling with something, I can really be open with you and share my need and hope that you can help me with it. Or hope that you know someone else who can help me with it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's true, like really just this mutual idea of we're here to help each other, like let's work together to figure this out. In fact, while you were talking, I was thinking about something that's been going on in my family just this week. As you know, it's time to start planning summer camp.
Yes.
And that's always one of the big stressors as a working parent, is trying to work that out. And we've got a group of friends who we're going to do parent camp for 2 weeks during the summer, where each of the parents of a group of 4 or 5 kids is going to take a day and take that day off from work. And there's that sense of trust that, okay, I'm going to take good care of your kids, and then I get 4 days where my kid is going to be taken care of by you. So, you know, it's just, and that's a real concrete example of sort of a team coming together to say we've all got this common challenge of finding care for our kids, and our kids wanting to spend time together, and how do we balance that, and then let's work together, and we've got to kind of shift around the days and figure out who's going to take which day, but we're all working together toward a common goal.
That's
so
right.
I think just kind of also, there's also with it is we're all in the same boat, and we understand there's sort of a common goal, and there's also sort of common challenges that we can understand, and we're trying to work through them together.
Yeah, and as you're talking, I hadn't thought about this before, but teams usually also promote creativity. So that's a really creative solution that's going to benefit the community. And so maybe in the community that you live in, you're noticing a need, or you're noticing, you know, there's an opportunity for a breakfast, and you love to make breakfast. And so, you know, you create some new resource in your community that other people benefit from, and then somehow that, you know, sort of older idea of bartering or trading, or kind of, you know, I use my talent in the marketplace and you have a different talent. I think those skills can really function to sort of, you know, promote what can we come up with together. Again, combating that idea that I'm a parent and facing a stressful situation and I feel alone. So ultimately, that's really what we're trying to share. That's why we're trying to connect online and create these resources, because most people who tell the story of feeling isolated and I felt alone, I didn't know where to turn, once they turn to someone and get out of that and get into that social connection, human beings are social creatures. We will always do better when we have another person kind of supporting what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and when we're in the Healthy Relationships Initiative, when we talk about happy, healthy, and safe relationships, healthy relationships are good communication and managing that conflict, things like that. But really, I love that you brought up the creativity piece of it, and because when we talk about happy relationships, we're really talking about joy-filled relationships and having fun with people. And when a team is really working well, it's saying, okay, we're in the middle of this sort of challenging experience of parenting, but we can have fun with this, and by helping each other out and being creative, coming up with creative solutions to problems or challenges that we're facing, it actually makes it more fun. There's a sense of enjoyment that comes from that, and camaraderie and creativity, and I just think that when teams are working together, it really can be such a positive experience.
That's right. I think a lot of people have heard this expression, it takes a village, but that's the image that we're really trying to create, is that people will come in and out of your village, but when they wander through, there's sort of an opportunity to have them, you know, be part of your life's journey and the skills that they bring. I'm a psychologist. People know that. When people approach me, a lot of times it's because I have a psychology background. I might not know their exact question, but I probably know someone they can ask, or I can just encourage them to keep looking. And so, you know, maybe you're a physician, maybe you are a great cook, maybe you know a lot about childcare, maybe you know a lot about baseball. Whatever your talent is, you share it with your village, the whole village benefits.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
Let's go ahead and take a question.
Sure. What are some ways to build a team, especially if you don't have a built-in team readily accessible, like for parents who are raising children alone or have moved from another state or country?
Great question.
Yeah, that is, because one of the things we were going to touch on is what are some of the challenges that can come up with teamwork. And for some people, a challenge is just how do you find a team, especially if you are kind of isolated. So what do you think about that?
That's right. So those two examples are probably 1 and 2 on the new list of stressors. So moving to a new community, especially when you don't have a built-in community that you're moving to. So let's start with that one. I'm a person who's moved a lot, and we have a lot of students at UNCG who are military affiliated, and they talk about the challenges of moving, but they also talk about the idea that other people move too. And so even though you might think this experience has only happened to you, really lots of people around might have relocated. And so the challenge, I think, is to, at least temporarily, if you're more introverted and more isolated, to just try and reach out in a little more purposeful way. Most people who are in a community, maybe they already have their teams and maybe they're going about their busy lives, but that doesn't mean they don't have room for you on their team, or that they might not connect you with other people that are in similar situations. So here are some just quick examples, and feel free to jump in with some others. You can take walks outdoors where other people gather. You can join clubs that are of interest to you, or go to free meetings in your community. If you have an organization that is a religious-based organization, you can not just go there for spirituality or joining, but you can look at programs that they host, or maybe they're having some type of child-related event. YMCA types of experiences, really anything where you're going to just come across more groups of people. And then the idea that, like, maybe you are having a baby, or you're kind of with a younger child and you feel isolated, there are lots of organizations that would sort of want to create groups for new mothers. So you can contact hospitals to see if those groups exist. You really can look in the newspapers or online in your local community to see who might be meeting up. So I think part of it is your own behavior that you can control. Okay, I have to be a little more friendly. I have to tell people that I've moved here. I have to tell people I have a young child. And then you have to just over time start to meet more people. And it might not go perfectly. Maybe people aren't as generous as you want them to be initially, but it really just takes one or two people, and now you've started to build the team, and before you know it, I think you'll have more contacts.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is so important to keep sort of realistic expectations. So taking all those steps and getting out there as much as possible, and kind of taking maybe more initiative, not just going, but maybe even starting groups, or inviting a group of moms to meet at the playground, or a group of parents to meet at the playground. But you know, but also keeping realistic expectations that it might take a few years even before you really start to find your people, you know, in that new community, but to keep trying in the process. And I would go back also to what you said earlier, that everybody plays a different role on the team. So it may take you a few years before you find that best friend or that person that you would trust leaving your kids with, for example, if you needed help when you were working. But there's real value in having the parent that you sit with while your kids are on a sports team together, you know, chit-chat at a playground. So just kind of trying to realize that it might take some time, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth taking those extra efforts, and you know, to push yourself out there a little bit and find those connections where you can.
Yeah, you know, it used to be that there were kind of more rules about how to be welcoming, and I think maybe some of those things have fallen away. So as a person who's moved a lot, I've always been hopeful that people have not welcomed us when we've gone to different places, but we've tried to do things outdoors to sort of see if people would come outside and see what's going on. So maybe you bring a ball to the park and suddenly you're playing catch, and I bet you a lot of other kids would come up and try to play that game. Or you might host a lemonade stand if it's safe, sort of in an area of your neighborhood. Or you might think about going to volunteer at a Special Olympics event and meet people, you know, through that organization. So it's hard to have one answer for every situation, but that's part of what we're trying to get people to do, is analyze what would improve my life. Do I want personal relationships? Do I want friends? Do I want better support from my family members? Or do I really need something in the professional community? Do I need a child care provider? Do I need a different pediatrician? Do I need to find a dentist? How do people know what's a good resource for that? Where can I get care? Am I looking for a child care subsidy, some government program that I might be entitled to? So depending on the need, if you're really clear and try to reach out to a professional, they may also be able to assist.
And I think for that reason too, it's good. Another possible way to build a team and familiarity with local resources would be to go to local resource fairs or local festivals where there's a real family focus, so that you can see who's out exhibiting at those organizations. Maybe just start talking to them, and it may be a resource that you don't need in that moment, but even if you feel kind of isolated and alone, just knowing what some of the resources are, if you should ever need them, can be really empowering for people.
That's right. And it's really happenstance. As long as you're out there with your situation, a lot of times people will be friendly and just tell you information. So you might be at a grocery store or a gas station and say, I've only lived here 6 months. Where's the best place to eat a hamburger? And then you might learn about a new restaurant, or, you know, a local cook that you might not have stumbled across. So there's so many different communities. Urban communities are busy, full of lots of people, and so it's hard to meet people because everything's changing all the time. Rural communities, fewer people, less infrastructure, And so one size fits all is not really going to work, but sort of continuing to try and reach out. Even if you're a more shy, introverted person, you can still, create a conversation with someone on the bus, on a walk, in the grocery store, and you just never know where it's going to lead.
And I think the most important thing to remember in those situations is that while it can be uncomfortable, there is such value in trying to find that team, even if it takes some time and even if it takes some effort, because if we go back to some of the things we talked about earlier, just the struggles that can come along with being more isolated. So just even if it's really a slow process of building that team, knowing how important it is.
That's right.
So on a related note, besides just finding a team, what are some of the other challenges that can come up for people in the process of building a team or in their parenting, or as they're kind of maintaining that team over time?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest one is going to be availability. And this is what we hear in sort of relationship stressful situations, is that because people are busy and also because people aren't very good at communicating their needs, we sort of expect others to do mind reading. And so I might be with my child and I might be struggling, and I'm not in a great position to accept help from people. So people on my team are not available when I really need them. Like when my baby is up at 1 in the morning and I don't know what to do, there's no one around on my team to help me. And then I'm very crisis oriented. So I'm not seeking out my team like when I'm in a healthy place and maybe doing more fun kinds of things. Like I'm only relying on my team when I'm like really struggling. And while that's important, it can wear out your team because you're always needing your team and you're not investing back in them. So for example, if you're constantly sort of asking people to do things for you and maybe they're not available, you might feel frustrated, and then you feel like they're not really part of your team, but really it's just a problem of availability. One of the things that really concerns me in some of the research that we've been doing is that over 50% in national polls will report things like getting less than 1 week's notice for their work schedules. That's a big problem for people who are trying to juggle childcare and work responsibilities and getting homework done. And so even just having a regular person who says, you know what, on Fridays, I'm usually home, so if you ever need help on a Friday, I'm available for you. That makes such a difference in the team because it puts a little bit of regularity into the structure. And I know that sounds really hard to figure out, but that's where the stress is going to come from. Like you feel like people are on your team, but they're just not available to you when you actually need them. And so you have to be a little bit more planful, like the example you're talking about with summer camp, or my weekends, or I would just love someone to go to church with me on Sunday because it would be nice to have an extra set of hands to help me. That's a big challenge, is like who's available on your team. So people are committed, they love you, they love your child, but they're just not able to deliver.
Mm-hmm. And I think going along with that too, and you touched on this a little bit, but maybe not as directly, around communication. Mm-hmm. So communication breakdowns can also happen there, so where people are maybe not communicating what their needs are or asking, or people might be available every Friday, but they're not communicating that to somebody. So really, I think a lot of the problems also can come up when people are not communicating well, or they have expectations in their mind about what they would like their team to be able to do, but they're not communicating it, or maybe even some discomfort. I can think of situations in my experiences as a parent where maybe I didn't 100% agree with something that somebody else on the team, whether it's a teacher or somebody else who's involved in my child's life, and I'm maybe not super comfortable bringing that up right away because I don't want to offend that person or put them off. So maybe I let certain things go unsaid, but over time then it could lead to bigger differences. So not having that communication, I think, also can be a big barrier. So do we have a question that's related to this?
We do. So on that note, how do you navigate differences of opinion without alienating other team members?
I'm so glad that we were getting to this question because I don't want to run out of time for this. And it has to do with what your disagreement is about and also the intensity of emotion. Mm-hmm. And so some disagreements are actually really, really important to voice. and they have to do with parenting goals and strategies. So if we have two parents or two family members or a teacher and a parent who have very different goals for the child, those disagreements are probably about what's going to happen that's in the child's best interest. If a teacher thinks it's very important for a child to be doing early math, and she can give a lot of reasons, but the household doesn't really understand why, or doesn't have the right resources at home, or doesn't have the time to invest in the child, the disagreement isn't really about the importance of math. The disagreement is about whose responsibility is it to teach the math. And so the adults on the team might be in disagreement, and if they don't share their opinions about this, there's not going to be any progress. There's just going to be hard feelings. So one thing is that some disagreements really are worth having, and like you're saying, if you bury that and you feel really strongly about that, that's going to be harmful over time. The second point, though, is about how to disagree. And when people disagree in very emotional ways, this is what I mean by intensity of emotion, I can look at you and sort of say, I'm not sure I agree, and I would like to just share what I think, and then we can work out. I mean, you wouldn't say all that in one sentence, right? But it's different than if I say, absolutely not, in a very loud voice. I might be insulting you. I might be saying your ideas are really wrong. So it becomes an issue about which part of the team is right or wrong, as opposed to what is the goal of the conversation and what is the goal that's going to be in the best interest of the child. And remember, not everybody has the same goals for the child at the same time. So my goal might be to have a happy, healthy home with everyone in bed by 9:30. And the teacher's goal may be to really invest in the child's future and teach them the most math and the most reading so they can have the highest test scores and do the best in school, because that's what that teacher knows and that's what they're paid to do. So I think disagreements, to answer the question, it matters what the subject is, and then it matters how intense you are with your emotion. And the best advice is always to try to not disagree with a lot of emotion, to try to set aside time to talk about the problem when you're not emotionally upset about the problem, right? Take a time out. This feels very intense. Let's make an appointment, or let's talk about this another time. And to really always use those I statements, to really talk about your own feelings and to not be criticizing the other person for having a different opinion. And then you can start to really understand each other's points of view. But there's so many different opinions about parenting, it's unlikely you're going to avoid disagreements.
Right. It seems pretty inevitable. And
exactly.
We've got a lot of great resources through the HRI website with some basic conflict resolution, conflict management, communication. But I do think that as a parent, there's a couple things that I would sort of add, or maybe, sort of also put out there to what you said, that I think that sometimes if people have different perspectives, then being open to what they have to say is very valuable. It goes along with what you're saying, I think, to say, I'm only seeing one piece of this, and I can see that this may not be what I want, but maybe I should at least consider it. So trying to meet different perspectives more with a sense of curiosity and thinking, well, why might this person be thinking this compared to what I'm thinking? And maybe through that process of clarifying it can come to a better solution. And maybe it's not either or, but maybe there's some sort of middle ground that can be reached. But then I do also think as a parent, there is that sometimes is that time to remember thinking in your role as the coach, and so while other people may have opinions, ultimately each parent, to the extent that it's promoting their child's healthy growth and development, really sometimes does have to make the call, right? And so sometimes they are going to have to sort of recognize that they do get to make certain choices. And so if going to bed at 9:30 is what's really important, and it might mean getting 15 minutes less of extra reading in during the night or something like that, obviously there's a priority there, but as a parent, I think parents should feel empowered to make choices that are in line with their values and what they believe are the highest priorities for their family.
Yeah, I think the stress can really come when you perceive somebody on your team as really having an important influence over your child. So it's a really different thing to have two parents or you and your mom in disagreement about what's best for your child. That feels very different than if there's a professional kind of working with you, giving you advice, and it just isn't really helpful for you. That's the situation where empowerment really is important to say, I don't think this is what we need right now. Maybe we can continue to look and find a different resource. So I think it's also important to think about, is this my family and, you know, a set of relationships that are going to be with my child for a long time? I have a really not important example, but, you know, if grandparents really want to take children out for a lot of sweets and treats and spoil them, you know, maybe that's okay if it's just a few times or the children understand that. But if it's constant and it's really undermining your parenting, that may be a situation where you'd have to have a discussion about your opinion about that. So I think there's a real difference when your teammate is related to you and part of your close family network.
Right, because it's both navigating the decision for the child, but then also navigating the relationship with the teammate too, which is, you know, which are two related things.
That's right.
So it looks like we have another question on this topic too.
Are there downsides to relying too heavily on teammates as a primary caregiver?
I would say, kind of first off, kind of going along with those lines of for parents being able to kind of assert their own, be empowered to make decisions about their child. I think that if you're relying so much on other people to tell you what to do, then to some extent maybe you're not getting the information that you need to be able to make those decisions. So definitely access to that information can be a challenge for certain people, but I would say that I think to some extent for parents, if they're not feeling empowered to make decisions for themselves, that they might not have all the information that they need. And so to me that would be the first thing that comes to my mind for that question.
So I had two things, but building off what you were saying, you know, do you have space in your own life, and maybe this is a different part of your team, like do you have space to figure out what your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish? And a lot of people say that that's why it's important to have a friend, and a friend who's not going to interfere and just let you talk and not really have a stake in kind of what's going to happen, but to help you figure out big important decisions. Do I want to return to school and change careers? Do I want to put my daughter in childcare, or do I want to raise her, you know, at home until she goes to kindergarten? Do I want to choose a charter school versus a private school versus a homeschool option? So when you're sorting through parenting decisions, if you rely too much on other people's opinions, you can feel lost and not in control. But also, your team can help you figure out what you really think about something. And I don't think that's relying on the team, but I think it's helping create space for you to process sort of strengths and weaknesses. The other thing I'll say, and this is a concept that students in my courses have a really hard time with, but we know from the attachment literature that children form bonds with many people in different ways over the sort of first 18 months of life. It takes a very long time, many, many months, to develop this deep connection with adults. And so as long as the child sees the people on the team as supporting them, they are going to thrive and feel healthy. And so it's not so much that you're relying on the team, it's that the child has all these adults that they feel secure with, and older siblings and other family members, and so they are really taking the investments of those people in their own life, and so over time they will just feel like they lived a really full and healthy upbringing. So that was the other kind of way I was thinking about that question, that you can have bonds, deep bonds, with lots of individuals, even as a child.
Yeah, and I think the other thing with that question that makes me think about is the, as a parent, guilt is a very common emotion, like wishing you could, always feeling like you wish you could do better. Or, you know, I think it's a natural tendency for a lot of parents to kind of beat themselves up over their decisions, and there may be times in a parent's life or during a season in the child's life where you really do need to rely heavily on your team. And if that's the case and if that's what's really needed to get through
Right.
a certain season of life, if you're working 3 jobs and going back to school and trying to better your life and you're really relying a lot on other people to help you, then you shouldn't feel guilty about that.
That's
you know,
right.
just really remind yourself and empower yourself, not only to make the best decisions for the child, but also really thinking about yourself in that situation too.
That's right. I mean, we would hope that there would be others, and that's why I think programs like this aren't just for people who are parents, but I think people around parents can say, you know what, it looks like you just got an important phone call. It's really okay if you step out.
Yeah.
Or, hey, we just changed this meeting time. Is that going to work with your schedule? Or for businesses around the country, there's national movements right now for employers to be more forward-looking with scheduling and sick leave and family leave and all of these things that are family-friendly, but they're really not family-friendly. They're essential parts of a healthy team.
Right.
Because if I can't go to my employer and sort of navigate my challenges when my child is sick, that's going to impact the business, the family, and ultimately the child. So it isn't just an individual problem. We have to do better as advocates to also work in our communities to support families broadly.
Yeah, definitely. And I know we're down to about our last 10 minutes, so it looks like we have a question. Do we have a question about parenting in some specific situations and teamwork?
We do. We've actually had this question come up a few times, and so what are some of the more common factors that are unique in the teamwork for divorced parents? And what suggestions do you have for creating that teamwork, especially when the divorce was contentious?
Right. So you really have some wonderful resources in HRI to sort of think about situations when couples are facing conflict, distress, or perhaps separation or divorce. The thing that I will say from the parenting side of things is we know 2 things are very clear from the literature. Number 1, children absorb and are aware of parental conflict. And number 2, it is not uncommon for children to personalize that experience and believe that they are somehow the cause, especially for much younger children. They just lack the cognitive awareness to realize that adults may choose to separate for different reasons. They just tend to more personalize and think that they might have done something wrong. So what that means is that for couples who are heading on a process perhaps towards divorce, that's a long process. It doesn't happen overnight. The adults have to be very intentional about trying to not have their disagreements either involve the child or have the child be exposed to that. And they also have to work really hard, this is so difficult, to not recruit the child as an ally against one or other family members. And clinically, these are some of the hardest stories to hear when children lose deep, we just talked about these deep bonds that they have with people, and they lose access to those individuals when families divorce. They can no longer see their grandparent, or they know that their parents are fighting and they feel somehow tied up in that. These are really, really challenging situations. Most people do pursue at some point some external help, but as best as you can to realize the adults have to agree to co-parent and to keep the goal of the child's development intact, regardless of any of the conflict, bad feelings, or lack of relationship. But it's really challenging. I'm not here to say it's easy. It's just that's the recommended strategy.
And I think along with that, because the question did mention about if it's contentious. So obviously the ideal is for both parents in the post-divorce family to be able to agree to cooperate and co-parent. But sometimes that isn't possible. And so I think if you are a parent who is dealing with somebody who's not willing to kind of work as a positive teammate, I think it's really important to work on your own emotions and your own coping strategies. And as hard as it can be sometimes to keep that positive focus, try to keep the communication positive, try to keep the relationship positive, try to not get the kids caught in the crossfires of it.
That's right.
Even if one parent isn't cooperating, to not underestimate the value that one positive co-parent can have for that child and keeping it as positive as possible, because there's only so much that you can do in terms of other people on the team. And I think that as much as that question does often come up in divorce cases, that could happen in any sort of team situation. You could have a really negative experience with a professional, a neighbor, a coach, a teacher, a friend, a grandparent, an in-law, and anytime there's that sort of situation, I think the more that people can really just do your best to manage your emotions, to make sure that you're responding in a way that maintains your integrity, your values, and your focus on the child.
Two other quick things about that is to realize that positive and negative in this situation are not on one train track. So you can put positive things out, but you can also minimize negative. And so that might be a no contact order, that might be communication through another family member that does not involve the parent that you are separating from. It could also mean communicating through written fashion and not actually having contact. So there's a lot of different ways to minimize negative. And the second thing that's overlooked actually from the child's perspective is they're looking for consistency. And that's very difficult to achieve, but anything you can do to sort of make the rules more similar or to have both parents informed about school-related situations. There will be potentially custody issues. So legally, anything that's going to ensure that both people have to provide for the child and be jointly invested, irrespective of the conflict and the negative distress, keeping that consistency for the child can be really important.
Yeah, so, and that's a very important issue, so I'm glad that whoever it was that submitted that question did so. So we are coming pretty much to the last couple minutes of our program. So before we close for today, Julie, what are some final thoughts for you, what you hope people take away from our conversation today?
Yeah, so we've had a really interesting time of looking at how to build a team, what are some people you can have on your team, what does it look like when you have a good team functioning, and then what happens in certain situations where divorce will change the people on your team or moving will separate you from old people that were on your team and you have to build up new members. So whatever way you can approach this context, I think you want to keep in mind that as a parent or a person who supports parents, it takes more than one individual to help a child be successful. It's a lot of work, and there's no way that we can have access to all the information we need. So being open to other people and their contributions, and also creating space for yourself to figure out new resources is really important. And I think the last thing to think about is, well, where do I find these resources in my community? How do I get started? So obviously just getting on the internet and kind of searching for parenting resources locally would be helpful, but then also talking to people who seem to have information. So religious leaders, sports leagues, people that you meet through your child's school, other professionals in the community. Most professionals will meet with you free at least once to just sort of try it out and see if there's a good connection. And if they don't, you probably don't want to meet with them anyway. So look for free resources through YWCAs, YMCAs, Salvation Army, other nonprofits in your community. There's just a lot of places for you to go. And the value that you'll bring to your child's life will really, really be worth the emotion that you might feel, a little discomfort, a little uncertainty. Somebody will probably reach out and be willing to help you.
Well, thanks so much, Julie, for all the great insights that you shared today. And again, for anybody who's interested in diving deeper into this topic, check out the HRI e-Learning Center, where you can find the full-length program featuring Julie about teamwork and parenting. But we do hope that this program was a meaningful experience for you and that you learned some information to help you strengthen the relationships in your life. Please do, before you sign off, take the time to fill out the feedback form, because we really value the chance to hear from you as we're thinking about improving future programs for HRI. And for those who are interested, our next Relationship Booster will be 2 weeks from today on Friday, March 15th, and our topic is going to be couples and money. So thank you so much for being here today, and we hope that you take a lot away from this program.